A husband disappeared for 12 years, then came back with an attorney after his autistic son's artwork sold for $3.1 million. I was prepared to surrender until my stepson quietly murmured, "Let me take this." What unfolded in court wasn't dramatic. It was lawful, precise, and unforgettable. Sound of a low, suspenseful hum, perhaps a faint ticking clock, fading as narration begins. Can you imagine a moment so utterly infuriating, so soul-crushing, that it makes your blood run cold? For me, that moment hit like a physical blow when my ex-husband's lawyer, with a smug, almost pitying smirk, slid a thick folder across my kitchen table and declared, "Mrs. Lawson, your son's painting is worth $3.1 million, and my client is here to claim his share." But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly fathom, was that the quiet, sensitive boy they thought was an easy target had spent 12 long years meticulously preparing for this exact fight. The folder landed with a dull, heavy thud on the scarred oak table my father bought secondhand back in '89. That same table where Ethan did his homework, where I paid bills, where I'd cried so many silent tears after impossibly long shifts. My coffee maker rattled and hissed behind the lawyer, finishing a pot that suddenly felt utterly pointless. His hand, manicured, pale, unnervingly steady. "My client," he continued, clearing his throat, "is prepared to pursue his legal rights as the biological father." Across from me sat Richard Lawson, my ex-husband. He looked exactly the same. Still handsome, in that clean, polished, utterly hollow way. Smelling faintly of expensive cologne, radiating a confidence that made my stomach churn. He hadn't changed a bit. Still good at pretending nothing, absolutely nothing, had ever happened. 12 years. That's how long it had been since I'd last seen him. 12 years of silence. I looked at Ethan. My son. He was sitting next to me, his fingers tapping lightly against his thigh. 1, 2, 3, 4, it was his way. His rhythm. His quiet anchor in a world that always felt too loud, too chaotic for him. But his eyes were fixed on that folder. Focused. Sharp. It was a look I knew well, a silent intensity that spoke volumes. $3.1 million, the lawyer repeated, as if I hadn't heard him the first time. The painting sold last month in Chicago. Richard's smile widened then. Not at me, not at Ethan, but at the room, as if this whole thing was already over. A done deal. I should have screamed. I should have picked up that ceramic coffee mug and thrown it against the wall. Instead, I just felt tired. Bone deep, crushing fatigue. I turned to my own attorney, who sat quietly beside me, and whispered, "Let him take it." Richard's smile, if possible, widened even further. He'd won. That's when Ethan leaned towards me, his voice a low, steady current in the suddenly charged air. "Margaret," he said, "let me handle it." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The lawyer raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his carefully neutral expression. Richard let out a short, dismissive laugh. "This is between adults," he sneered. "He doesn't even." Ethan stood up. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just enough to be seen. To be noticed. "My name is Ethan Lawson," he said, his voice unwavering, calm. "I'd like to hear the claim again." Slowly. Something shifted then. I felt it in my chest. A deep, resonant thrum. But none of this confrontation in my quiet kitchen, this didn't start there. It started 12 years ago. In Toledo, Ohio. On a Tuesday night in March. Richard packed one suitcase. One. He said he was leaving. Said he needed a different life. A different me. He couldn't handle all this. He didn't even look at Ethan. Not once. Ethan was 5 then, sitting on the living room floor, lining up his toy cars by color. Richard said he was going to Florida, that the weather helped him think. I stood in the doorway, holding my son, who didn't like being touched when he was overwhelmed but clung to me anyway. "Dad's going on a trip," I told Ethan. Richard didn't correct me. I asked about child support, about visits, about his responsibility. Richard just waved a hand. "I'll have my lawyer handle it," he said, and walked out the door. He never came back. By Friday, his phone was disconnected. We stayed in Toledo for another year. Mostly because moving costs money when you don't have any. Ethan started kindergarten that fall, and every single morning was a battle. The noise, the lights, the kids screaming and laughing. It was all too much. He'd rock back and forth on the couch, pressing his palms together, whispering numbers under his breath. His anchor, his coping mechanism. One morning, after a meltdown so severe the neighbors knocked to check on us, I called Richard. Left a message. Begged for help. 2 days later, an email arrived. This isn't my problem anymore. I saved that email. I didn't know why at the time. I just did. Cedar Falls, Iowa. That's where we landed next. It wasn't romantic, but it was affordable. A 2-bedroom rental with a creaky porch and a kitchen that forever smelled like old pine cleaner. I found work at a diner on Main Street. Early shifts, endless coffee refills, men who complained about the weather, women who tipped in coins. Ethan didn't talk much then, not in full sentences. But he listened. He watched. He noticed patterns. He'd line his cereal by color before eating it. If I bought a different brand, he'd go quiet for hours. Money was always tight. Some nights, I ate toast so Ethan could have chicken. Some weeks, I chose between gas and his paints. The painting started by accident. One bitter winter evening, after the power flickered out during a storm, Ethan dragged an old cardboard box from the closet. Inside were school paints someone had donated. Dried up. Cracked. He added water. Stirred carefully. Sat at the table under a lantern and painted until midnight. What came out wasn't just a picture. It was a feeling. A kitchen table. Hands folded. Light falling just right. I stared at it until my eyes burned. From then on, painting became his language. When school overwhelmed him, he painted. When he couldn't explain why something hurt, he painted. I learned to read the colors, the way other mothers read faces. There were bad years. Years when the car wouldn't start. Years when Ethan screamed because the tag on his shirt scratched his neck. Once, when he was 10, he had a sensory meltdown so severe we ended up in the ER. Fluorescent lights. Beeping monitors. I called Richard again. Left 3 messages. He never replied. The bill came 2 weeks later. I cried in the laundry room so Ethan wouldn't hear me. That winter, we ate cereal for dinner more than I like to admit. I told Ethan it was fun. He just looked at me and said, "We're saving." Like it was obvious. I just nodded and swallowed the shame. By middle school, Ethan started keeping notebooks. Dates. Times. What happened. Not emotions, just facts. When the school called. When the landlord fixed the heater. When I worked double shifts. When Richard didn't show up to court hearings he'd been notified about. I didn't ask him to do that. He just did. When he was 15, his art teacher, Mrs. Clean, pulled me aside after a local show. "You need to protect him, Maggie," she said. She didn't mean physically. She meant legally. We met with a local lawyer, Tom Bradley. Gray hair. Cheap suit. He talked slowly, explained things twice. He helped us set up a custodial account and a trust that would protect Ethan if money ever came. I remember laughing nervously when he said that. Money never came to us. Not like that. Until Chicago. The gallery smelled like wine and money. Ethan wore noise-canceling headphones, stayed close to me, his jaw set. When the bidding started, I didn't understand what was happening. Numbers flew. People nodded. Then the hammer fell. $3.1 million. Ethan squeezed my hand once, hard, then let go. The article came out a week later. Local Iowa teen artist breaks records. There was a picture of Ethan, standing stiffly, hands folded. Richard must have recognized the nose. The eyes. That's when the letters started. Now, sitting in my kitchen long after they'd left, I stared at the door. "You don't have to do this, Ethan," I whispered. "We can settle. We can be done." Ethan shook his head. "He didn't forget us," he said. "He ignored us. There's a difference." I realized then that while I'd been surviving, Ethan had been preparing. And for the first time since Richard left, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not fear, but absolute, crystal clarity. Chicago felt too loud the second time. The gallery sat just off Michigan Avenue, all glass and polished stone, the kind of place where people whispered even when they were excited. The floors reflected light like water. Every step echoed. Ethan pressed his headphones tighter over his ears, jaw set, eyes scanning for exits the way he always did in unfamiliar places. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded once. That meant, not really, but manageable. The painting, evenings at home, hung alone on a white wall, lit from above. No faces, just a kitchen table, 2 chairs, and a single lamp casting a warm circle of light. The kind of scene most people walked past without noticing, unless they'd lived it. A man in a dark blazer stood beside it, arms crossed. "It feels honest," he said to no one in particular. "Like endurance." Ethan didn't respond. He never did. When strangers talked about his work instead of to him, he just stared at the floor, fingers tapping lightly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Grounding himself. The sale had already happened. This visit was for paperwork. Press photos. I hated every minute. A reporter asked me how it felt to raise a gifted child alone. I gave a polite answer and changed the subject. Another asked where Ethan's father was. "Not involved," I said. Flat. Final. The article ran anyway. Midwest paper, small circulation but big enough. 3 days later, Tom Bradley called me. "Maggie," he said, "your ex-husband has retained counsel." I wasn't surprised. Just tired. The first mediation was scheduled for the following week in Des Moines. Neutral office. Beige walls. Coffee that tasted burned. Richard arrived early, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. His lawyer, a younger man with sharp shoes and sharper smiles, did most of the talking. "Blood is blood," he declared, spreading his hands. "Mr. Lawson has rights." Ethan sat beside me, shoulders tight. The room buzzed, lights humming, air vent rattling. Too much. I felt his knee bounce faster. I leaned close. "Breathe," I whispered. He breathed. The lawyer slid a document across the table. "We're seeking a fair portion of the proceeds." I watched Richard's face. Expectant. Confident. "That money isn't mine," I said. "It never was." The lawyer blinked. "Excuse me?" "It belongs to Ethan," I clarified, "through a custodial trust established 2 years ago." Richard laughed. A harsh, disbelieving sound. "You can't just hide money." Tom Bradley cleared his throat. "It's not hidden. It's documented." Ethan lifted his head. "Page 3, he said softly. Everyone turned. "The trust," Ethan continued, his voice steady, "was established when I was 15. It's irrevocable without court approval. The funds are restricted." The lawyer frowned, flipping pages. "You rehearsed this." Ethan shook his head. "I reviewed it." Richard's smile tightened. "The mediator suggested a break." When we stepped into the hallway, Ethan pressed his hands to his ears, breathing fast. "Too much," he murmured. We found a quiet corner by the stairwell. I rubbed his back, counting breaths with him. He closed his eyes. "I can do this," he said, "just not all at once." Back inside, Richard leaned forward. "Son," he said, lowering his voice, "this doesn't have to be ugly." Ethan looked at him. Really looked. "You left," he said. "That's not ugly. That's a fact." The room went completely still. After the meeting, Tom pulled me aside. "He's good," he said, "but your ex's lawyer will dig." "I know," I said. That night, back in the hotel, Ethan sat on the bed with his notebook open, pages filled with dates, court notices, printouts, email headers. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "Patterns," he said, "and gaps." He showed me an email chain from years ago, one I barely remembered. Richard declining visitation. Another refusing to attend a school meeting. Then one I'd never seen, forwarded by the court clerk about unpaid child support and a missed hearing. "They sent notices," Ethan said. He didn't go. I felt my chest tighten. "You kept all this?" "Yes." I thought about the nights I cried in the laundry room, the mornings I smiled anyway, the way Ethan had watched everything, quietly filing it away. Money changes people, I said, more to myself than to him. Ethan looked up. It reveals them, he said. Outside, traffic hummed. Sirens in the distance. A city that didn't know us and didn't need to. But Richard knew now. And he was about to learn something else. I told Tom Bradley I was willing to cooperate. The words tasted wrong in my mouth, but I said them anyway. Tom looked at me over his glasses, surprised, maybe a little disappointed. "You're sure?" he asked. "I'm tired," I said. And that part was true. If giving him a piece makes this end faster, then fine. Word traveled fast. Richard's lawyer called the next morning, suddenly pleasant. Suggested timelines, floated numbers, talked like we were already halfway to an agreement. Richard even left a voicemail that night. "Maggie," he said, soft and almost kind. "I'm glad you're being reasonable." I deleted it without replying. Inside, everything in me twisted. Every instinct I had as a mother screamed, "Don't you dare back down." But something else, older, quieter, told me to wait. To let him think he was winning. Ethan didn't say much at first. He just watched me closely, like he always did when something changed. That night, the rain wouldn't stop. It tapped against the kitchen window in uneven bursts, like someone drumming fingers in impatience. I sat at the table with a stack of old folders spread out in front of me. Tax returns, school letters, medical bills I'd never fully paid off. I might be making a mistake, I said aloud. Ethan stood in the doorway, rocking slightly on his heels. "Maybe," he said. Then he paused. "But mistakes have records, too." He came over and pointed to the folders. "We need everything, especially the things you don't like looking at." I laughed once, sharp and bitter. "There's a lot of those." We worked late. The fridge hummed. The clock ticked, loud enough to be annoying. Ethan organized papers into neat stacks, labeling them in his precise handwriting. Dates mattered to him. Sequences. Proof. At one point, his breathing changed. Shorter, faster. His fingers started tapping hard against the table. I recognized the signs. "Too much?" I asked. He nodded. We stopped. Sat in silence for a minute. I counted breaths with him until his shoulders lowered again. "I can keep going," he said. "No," I said firmly. "You can rest." He didn't argue. The next day, I met my friend Carol for coffee. She'd known me since the diner days. She listened quietly as I told her about the mediation, about my decision to cooperate. "You're letting him win," she said gently. I stared into my cup. "I know what it looks like." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Just don't forget who you are." That night, doubt crept in. Real doubt. The kind that makes you stare at the ceiling and replay every choice you've ever made. I thought about calling Richard. About offering a settlement just to be done. About choosing peace over pride. At 2 a.m, I sat alone in the kitchen, rain still tapping the glass. The old coffee maker clicked on out of habit. I didn't even drink it. I opened Ethan's notebook. Inside were lists, emails printed and annotated, notes from court websites. One page caught my eye, highlighted. Notice of default child support hearing. Defendant failed to appear. My hands shook. "You kept this," I whispered. "I remembered it," Ethan said from behind me. I hadn't heard him come in. "They sent it to you when I was 8. I closed my eyes. I could see it now. The envelope. The fear. How I'd shoved it into a drawer because I didn't have the energy to deal with it. "I thought it didn't matter anymore," I said. Ethan's voice was calm. "It matters because he wants credit for something he didn't do." The next mediation session was tense. Richard's lawyer pushed harder, sensing weakness, throwing around phrases like parental entitlement and fairness. Richard nodded along, smug again. Then Tom slid a document across the table. "Before we discuss numbers," he said, "we need to address outstanding obligations." The lawyer frowned. "What obligations?" Ethan leaned forward. "Child support," he said. "And abandonment." Richard laughed. "That's ancient history." Ethan met his eyes. "History is still evidence." Richard's lawyer tried to interrupt. The mediator held up a hand. Ethan's leg bounced under the table. I reached down and squeezed his knee. He took a breath and continued. There were multiple notices, he said. He failed to appear. There's a record with the state. The room shifted. Not victory yet, but doubt. Richard's lawyer asked for time to review the documents. The meeting adjourned early. Outside, Ethan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath all day. You okay? I asked. Yes, he said. Then, after a pause, tired.
So was I.
But underneath the exhaustion was something else now. A steadiness. A sense that giving in had never been surrender. It had been strategy. Richard thought I was weak because I was quiet. He had no idea how much strength silence can hold. The courthouse in Blackhawk County smells like paper and old coffee. I noticed that first, sitting on the hard wooden bench outside courtroom B, my purse clutched too tightly in my lap. The clock above the door ticked louder than it should have. Every sound felt amplified. The shuffle of shoes, a cough down the hall, the low murmur of voices leaking through heavy doors. Ethan sat beside me, hands folded, back straight. He wore the same gray sweater he always wore when he wanted to feel steady. His foot tapped once, then stopped. He took a slow breath. You don't have to speak if you don't want to, I whispered. I want to, he said, just not fast. Inside, Richard paced. He looked irritated now, not smug. His lawyer spoke to him in quick bursts, pointing at a legal pad. When Richard glanced our way, his eyes slid past Ethan and landed on me. This time, there was no smile. We were called in. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Beige walls. An American flag in the corner. A handful of people sat behind us, local reporters, a few curious onlookers. The judge, a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a calm voice, took her seat and surveyed the room. This court is here to determine the validity of the petitioner's claim, she said evenly. Proceed. Richard's lawyer went first. He stood tall, confident again, speaking about biology, about rights, about fairness. He said Richard had made mistakes, but was still a father. He said the money represented opportunity, and that opportunity should be shared. Richard nodded along, hands folded, like he belonged there. When it was our turn, Tom stood. But before he spoke, Ethan raised his hand slightly. The judge looked surprised, then curious. Young man, she prompted. I'd like to speak, Ethan said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. The lawyer beside Richard shifted in his seat. Your Honor. The judge raised a hand. I'll allow it. Ethan stood. His hands shook at first. I could see it. I could feel it, too, like a current passing between us. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him, but I didn't. I trusted him. My name is Ethan Lawson, he said. I'm 17. I'm the artist. A murmur rippled through the room. I was 5 when my father left, Ethan continued. I didn't see him again. Not at school. Not at the hospital. Not in court. Richard stared straight ahead. Ethan opened his folder. Pages neatly clipped. These are notices sent to my father regarding child support hearings. He didn't attend. These are emails declining visitation. And this, he said, lifting a final page, is an email sent when I was admitted to the emergency room. Tom read it aloud. Richard's words echoed in the quiet room. Cold. Dismissive. Unmistakable. This isn't my problem anymore. Someone in the gallery gasped, then silence. Richard's lawyer stood abruptly. Objection. Sit down. The judge said calmly. I'm listening. Ethan paused. His breathing sped up. The lights were bright. Too bright. I saw him press his fingers together under the table, grounding himself. I stood, placed a hand lightly on his back. He nodded, continued. The trust was created legally, he said. The money belongs to me. For my care. My future. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Lawson, she said to Richard, did you contest these notices at the time? Richard opened his mouth. Closed it. No, he said finally. The judge nodded once. Then your claim is denied. The words landed like a bell ringing through the silent room. Richard's face drained of color. His lawyer gathered papers, suddenly very quiet. In the back of the room, Someone whispered, "Wow." Ethan sat down slowly. I took his hand. He squeezed once. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed. I shielded Ethan with my body, guiding him through the noise. His breathing was fast again, but his eyes were clear. "You did it," I said softly. He shook his head. "We did." Richard passed us in the hallway. He looked older.
Smaller.
For the first time, he looked at Ethan. "This wasn't how it was supposed to go," he muttered. Ethan didn't respond. We walked out into the sunlight. The wind was cool. The courthouse doors closed behind us with a heavy, final sound. For 12 years, I had carried the weight of being abandoned. Today, I set it down. The drive home from Waterloo was quiet. Not the tense kind of quiet that makes your shoulders ache, but the kind that settles around you gently like dusk. The radio played low. An old country song I didn't recognize, steel guitar humming softly. The road stretched out ahead of us, flat and familiar, cornfields on either side, still brown from winter. Ethan stared out the window, his shoulders finally relaxed. "You hungry?"
I asked.
"Yes," he said. Then, after a beat, "Can we get the usual?" The usual meant the little diner off Highway 20, the one with the cracked vinyl booths and the waitress who always brought Ethan his burger plain. No questions asked. We pulled in without discussing it further. Inside, nothing had changed. The bell above the door jingled.
Coffee poured.
Someone complained about gas prices. Life going on, untouched by courtrooms or million-dollar paintings. Ethan slid into the booth across from me. He took off his sweater, folded it carefully, and set it beside him. His hands rested flat on the table. "You did really well today," I said. He nodded once. "It was loud." "I know, but it was fair," he added. That word stuck with me. Fair, not revenge. Not victory. Just fair. On the way home, the house looked the same as always. Peeling paint on the porch railing. Porch light flickering like it needed a new bulb. Inside, the familiar smells. Old wood, coffee grounds, a hint of paint thinner from Ethan's workspace in the spare room. He went straight there. The canvas was already set up, waiting. He stood in front of it for a long moment, breathing, fingers tapping lightly in that steady rhythm of his. Then he picked up a brush. I watched from the doorway, unnoticed. The first strokes were careful, measured, then freer. The tension I'd seen in him for weeks drained away, replaced by that deep focus I'd come to recognize as peace. I went back to the kitchen and turned on the coffee maker. The old thing rattled and complained, just like always. I smiled. For years, I thought strength meant standing tall and fighting back, raising my voice, proving something to the world. But that wasn't the strength that got us here. Strength was staying when someone walked away. Strength was choosing patience over bitterness. Strength was letting a quiet boy grow into a man who knew exactly who he was and what he deserved. Later that evening, Ethan brought the canvas into the living room. It wasn't finished, but I could already see it. A courthouse hallway. Light spilling through tall windows. Two figures walking side by side, not holding hands, but close enough to matter. "It's called after," he said. I swallowed hard. "It's beautiful." He shrugged, but there was the smallest hint of a smile. We didn't talk about Richard again. Not that night. Not much after. He faded back into wherever he'd been all those years, and I didn't feel the need to follow him there. The money stayed where it belonged, in a trust meant to protect, not to tempt. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Bills still came. The porch still needed fixing. I still worried sometimes, more than I should, but the weight was gone. I used to think I raised Ethan alone. Now I know that's not true. We raised each other. Through silence. Through struggle. Through the long years when no one was watching. If you've ever had to stand your ground quietly, if you've ever been underestimated because you didn't shout, or if you've carried something heavy for longer than felt fair, then you understand. Patience can be powerful, and dignity is a form of victory no one can ever take away. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where you realized someone completely underestimated your quiet strength? Or had to fight a battle you never expected to win? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories.